please make him very virtually welcome, Dr. Daniel Yergin. Daniel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Beverly. I trust the sound is okay. I do hear a little gentle sort of jazz in the background, but I don't know if everybody else is hearing that. Is the sound okay?
Wonderful. No one's hearing jazz. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. It's very restful, by the way. Thank you for that very gracious introduction. And I'm really glad to be with you all. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I wanted to say a deep congratulations for establishing the Sydney Energy Forum and its importance, its regional focus, and it's a really significant, and I've looked very carefully at the program and I realize how good it is. And of course, Australia's role, and it's so clear that Australia has so many different roles to play in the new supply chains for net zero emissions world. The urgency of the energy transition has been cited, I know, by everybody. It's widely recognized. And of course, that leads to the fundamental role of clean energy, which has been facilitated by the advances in technology, cost, and scale. We just heard from Minister Singh on that subject. But the events of the last 9 months, I think, are forcing us to think more deeply about energy transition, because I think an amnesia about energy security had settled over the world, and that amnesia has now been ended by an energy shock. So let me offer some context. We hear the term energy transition. We've been through them before. There's never been an energy transition like this one. The energy transition, and something I write about in the new map, began in January 1709 when an English metalworker figured out you could make iron better using coal rather than wood. All the other energy transitions took over a century, and there were also energy additions. Example, oil was discovered in the United States in 1859. It was not until 1960s that oil overtook coal as the world's #1 energy source. And today, the world uses 4 times as much coal as it did in the 1960s. So really, something quite remarkable is being pursued in 28 years to change the entire energy foundations of what today is an $88 trillion world economy. That's a very ambitious goal. And I think as we look at plans and everything, some degree of modesty is there because unexpected things happen, like COVID, like wars in Ukraine, and who knows what's ahead. Last summer, a prominent French economist named Jean Pisani-Ferry wrote a paper in which he warned that if you try and push too aggressively the 2050 goals into 2030, you would have tumultuous economic times, which he said would be rival the 1970s in their difficulties. He's a senior advisor, been an advisor to President Macron. He founded the most prominent economic research institute, very distinguished economist. It turned out he was very prescient because the energy crisis, as the minister said, did not start on February 24th when Russia invaded Ukraine. It began about a half year earlier with shortages of coal, then natural gas, and then oil. And I think there was, as I think the minister was saying, the way I describe it, there was preemptive underinvestment in conventional energy on the assumption that the change was going to happen. And it was driven, I don't think, by cartels. I think it was really driven by governments and investors putting pressure on companies to not invest as much in conventional energy. So you had preemptive underinvestment, and this is what Professor Pisani-Ferry predicted would happen. Of course, on February 24th, a global energy crisis became a global geopolitical crisis. And I would say the outcome of that is still not clear. I think the next few months could get far worse, could be more difficult than it is. The energy crisis could grow more serious, partly because markets are so tight, and also because Vladimir Putin, what he's doing right now is, as our German colleague will speak, is he laid out a strategy last month at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, which is to create economic hardship in Europe with shortages of natural gas, to lead to social unrest, bring populist parties to power, and as he said, change the elites. And he did say this, but to break the alliance on Ukraine. So I think that's a factor that other energy crises have not had to face. And right now, developing countries are paying the highest cost of this: economic cost, social cost, and there will be a political stability cost. And by the way, this feeds into the food crisis because 70% of the cost of food is actually energy, not only fertilizer, but also transportation and processing. At least that's what our economists calculate. I think we've seen a change of thinking in Europe. I was very struck by Economic Minister Habeck, one of the leaders of the Green Party, saying there's no black and white on energy. There's only gray. You have to think about it in balanced terms. So more renewables, but also more natural gas, and natural gas not coming from the east, but from the west. So I think a lesson from this is that energy transitions require energy security because you're not going to get the transition. You have too many problems. And energy security requires energy diversity. More than a century ago, Winston Churchill summarized it when he converted the Royal Navy from coal to oil. He said, safety in energy lies in variety, and variety alone, diversity. So that's still a fundamental. So when we get to energy transition, I think there's 4 issues that at least I would like to put on the table for you all to think about. One is the importance of stability of supply. We don't have large-scale battery storage yet. It needs to be balanced. We see in parts of the United States where you've seen instability in electricity, in California, blackouts, brownouts, rolling brownouts in California. And it's because over-reliance on renewables without the stabilizing factor of the other things that you need, like natural gas. Indeed, California was about to shut down its last nuclear power plant. It's now considering maybe it shouldn't do that. That would make their situation more difficult. So as renewables become more important, stability becomes more important. We've just seen that in Texas, where wind was not performing at a time when they were at maximum period in terms of energy demand. The second point to take in terms of energy transition is the pervasiveness of oil and gas, and just how it's so much part of the world in ways that you just don't think of, in terms of things in your house, in your office, in the way things work. Indeed, the lipid, if you had, any of you, I'm sure some of you had a Moderna vaccination. Some of you may have had a Pfizer vaccination. The lipid that carried that into your cells is an oil product, just for the record. The third, and I was listening to the minister talk about that, is the North-South divide. Some will remember there used to be a North-South divide that really emerged out of the 1970s about a rebalancing between the developed and developing world. I see a North-South divide occurring now in terms of climate and climate policy. That the view in Brussels is very different than a country in Africa that has 1/12 the per capita income of people living in Belgium or Germany. It was brought home to me, it's been brought home to me in a number of meetings and conversations, but I chaired a meeting with a number of African energy ministers, and I was really struck by almost there, somewhere between disappointment and anger. The vice president of Nigeria has been very clear. Why won't the banks finance natural gas pipeline that we need so that people are not burning waste wood, that they can get natural gas and not have the health problems and the shortened lifespan? But the comment was really brought home to me by the minister from Senegal, who was also talking about the banks not financing a natural gas pipeline. And she said, by not doing that, she said, they've taken away the ladder. What do they expect us to do? How do we go up the economic, improved standard of living if we don't have that ladder? What do they expect us to do, she said, to jump or to fly? And you may have noticed at the recent G7 meeting, they're saying, well, maybe we should relax that ban on not providing financing for energy development, conventional energy development that developing countries need. The fourth point I wanted to make is about the supply chains for net zero emissions. Yes, the cost of renewables has come down enormously. In my previous book, The Quest, I really delved deeply into the history, the modern history of wind and solar. And for the first 40 years, they were not economic. Now, of course, they're economic. Costs have gone down dramatically. Scale has gone up. But by the way, we see that the cost now, there seems to be a upturn. You've got to monitor it in the cost of those technologies. And people forget the wind is free, the sun is free, but not the materials that go in that are required for renewable energy. How many people recognize that an electric car today on average is 20% plastic? Now, a number of authorities, the US government, the Biden administration, the EU, the US Senate Energy Committee, the International Energy Agency, the World Bank, the IMF, have all recently done reports saying there's a problem. As the IEA said, we're going to move from a fuel intensive to a mineral intensive energy system. And all of them are raising the question, alarm, are the minerals there? Do we know what the scale is? What's going to be needed? And the concern is that if it's not addressed, if you don't understand what the costs are and supply is, what now seems cheap, renewables, the cost will go up. So we listened to the IEA, to the IMF, the World Bank, the US, the EU, and we said, okay, we being S&P Global are going to investigate that. And this has been a concern on my mind for some time, because in the new map, I write about this move from a world of big oil to a world of big shovels, in which you're going to need a lot more mining to meet the objectives. So on Thursday, well, let's see, it's Wednesday where you are. So tomorrow, for you, and 2 days for us, we'll be releasing a study that we've worked on for 8 months that brings the talent across S&P Global together on copper. Not lithium, not cobalt, because those are battery materials, but copper, because copper is the metal of electrification. It's, in a sense, it's the base load for energy transition. And the question is that available? Will there be available supply? And so we've looked at what will be required for copper in order to, on a technology, by a sub-technology basis, to meet the 2050 net zero emission goals. I can't, because we haven't released it yet, go into the numbers, because then we've balanced that, benchmarked it against mining capacity, improvements in mining, improvements in efficiency. And I'll just say at this point, there's going to be a gap, and that gap will have to be addressed, and it's true on other minerals too. So I think with climate, it's no longer the what. The goal is clear. The question is how, and it's going to take a much greater searching examination of the how. And there's a further problem, which are geopolitics. In a sense, Australia has experienced some of that in terms of its own supply chains. As we now see with semiconductors, can be caught up in the geopolitical, what has been called great power competition, strategic rivalry. And it's interesting, the Quad, in which both India and Australia participate, one of the themes now is the resilience of supply chains. There are different dimensions about that. Of course, part of that is about COVID, but part of it is geopolitical as well. And I think you all know what that means. So that, and I think it bears much greater examination of the minerals that will be needed, the building blocks of net zero emissions, and the availability of them. So in the study that we're going to come out with in 2 days or a day is really a beginning to say, actually, what's the quantification? And then we don't make policy recommendations. That will be for people at this conference and people at other conferences and governments in dialogue with industry to say, well, what should be the policies that will assure that? But I'll tell you, it's a big question, a very important question, and it will loom larger as the drive for net zero emissions increases because of the scale that will be involved, how much it will grow. But I will say that as we looked at it, one thing is very clear and very significant for this conference: Australia will have a very important role to play in the new supply chains for net zero. Thank you.